All right, good afternoon and welcome to this week's Iowa Learning Farms webinar. I'm Matt Helmers with Iowa State University, Director of the Iowa Nutrient Research Center and faculty affiliate with Iowa Learning Farms. I want to welcome you to this week's webinar. This week we got a interesting topic. Many of you might have seen either a webinar or virtual field day with Dr. Raj Raman or Dr. Dan Anderson about this perennial ground cover. But today we're going to hear from Dr. Gabrielle Myers. That's an incoming associate research hydrologist with the USDA Agricultural Research Service. She just finished her PhD here at Iowa State University in the Department of Agricultural and Biosystems Engineering. Proud alumnus, I think, of Iowa State University, and going to be starting her new job in July. And Gabby's going to talk to us today about assessing the impact of perennial ground cover and interseeded annual cover crops on corn yield and drainage water quality. With that, the virtual floor is all yours, Dr. Myers.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Gabby, like he said. I just finished my PhD in ABE at Iowa State, and today I'll just go over the field trial aspect of my studies where we looked at alternative cover cropping systems and their impact on water quality. I'll start with acknowledgements for this project. So first off, my major professors, Dan Anderson and Raj Raman, as well as my committee member, Ken Moore, secured the funding for this project and of course gave me a lot of guidance throughout. I got a lot of help from my fellow graduate student, Philip Roxon, and several undergraduate students with general sample collection, analysis, and keeping everything fun. Ken Pekanowski and his staff at the Northeast Research Farm completed our weekly water samples and helped the farm just run smoothly in general. And the Iowa State Water Quality Research Lab did all of our water sample analysis, which is, of course, very helpful. Our project received funding from the Iowa Nutrient Research Center, the Iowa Pork Producers Association, the Regen PGC project, and for part of my studies at Iowa State, I was funded by the National Science Foundation Research Traineeship, Data Fusion. So getting into some background, as many of you likely know, the Corn Belt is characterized by corn and soybean production, which results in long periods of bare soil between those growing seasons. So those periods result in many unintended environmental consequences, namely soil and nutrient losses from the fields. This leads to downstream eutrophication and dead zones, drinking water contamination, and then land degradation, of course, from that loss of soil. So we know that we need scalable solutions that are easily integrated into the Corn Belt agricultural lands in order to alleviate these issues. And one popular solution is cover crops. I'm first going to take a little time to explain what cover crops are and some of the challenges that exist with our current cover crop systems. So cover crops are plants other than the cash crop that are used to either extend or increase total soil cover in our annual row crop systems. In Iowa and the Corn Belt in general, cover crops are normally grown in opposite seasons of the cash crop and have been demonstrated to have a lot of environmental benefits, but especially in reducing nutrient export from agricultural lands and reducing total soil erosion. Management of annual cover crops looks like what I have on the screen now. Every year you plant the cover crop after you harvest the cash crop. And then in the fall and early spring, it starts to establish and provide soil cover, which is useful in Iowa, especially because spring is a time of our highest nutrient losses. Cover crops are then usually terminated with an herbicide before planting the next season's cash crop. Overall, the adoption rates of cover crops in the Corn Belt are pretty low. The most recent USDA census has Iowa at about 5%. Surrounding states may be at about 10%, but generally it's a low proportion of our total cropland acres that are using cover crops. So we have several reasons that have been identified for why cover crops have low adoption rates. but today I'll focus on the management requirements. So this graphic here is from a study from a different Myers, not me, and Wilson, where they analyzed surveys of non-cover crop adopters. And in that study, they found that farmers' top concern was the time and labor to maintain and manage the cover crop. And that's across 3 different studies or 3 different surveys. A separate study from 2017 found that the difficulty in the timing of those management operations that are required in annual cover crop systems was a top concern. Specifically, farmers were concerned that annual cover crops require establishment in the fall and termination in the spring, because those are very busy and time-constrained periods at the typical farm without using cover crops. So the first alternative cover cropping solution that I will cover today is the perennial ground cover, or PGC system. This system provides year-round plant cover by growing a perennial plant species between rows in row crop production. So for an ideal PGC, we would want it to be complementary to the cash crop or not compete with the cash crop for nutrients and moisture, while maybe providing some benefits like weed or pest control. Ideally, the PGC would be commercially available, shallow rooted, and easily to establish and suppress. The Region PGC project and others have explored several different species for this, grass and clover, for both their crop compatibility and how easy they are to manage. The initial management of this system is pretty similar to annual cover crops. You need to plant the PGC after you harvest the cash crop, although that's a little flexible and it could be moved depending on the weather or just what's going on at the farm in that year. You may then need to chemically suppress the perennial ground cover if it's well established in that first year. And by suppress, I mean just turn it brown for a little while, so you avoid the shade avoidance response associated with yield loss with corn. In the following years, though, because it's perennial, you don't need to replant it. And then you also, depending on the species, might not need to suppress it. There are some grass species that are being explored that go dormant in the summer or sort of self-suppress, and so they pose less of a yield risk to corn. Either way, this suppression step, we believe, could be more compatible than the termination step in annual cover crops, because you moved it from pre-cash crop planting in the annual system to post-cash crop planting in the perennial ground cover system, which might be less busy. The next alternative cover cropping system in this project is interseeded cover crops. In this system, you plant the cover crops after the corn is already growing. So you can see in one of these upper pictures, I have a picture of Brian Doherty planting the cover crops in our trial into standing corn. In our case, we use non-winter hardy cover crops, so they die over the winter and need to be replanted each year. The main advantage of this system is that the planting operation is taken away from the busy time after harvest and moved to the less busy time after planting. You are also more likely to have much more of the good weather that helps cover crops establish and provide ecosystem services for a longer period of time than in the typical annual row crop systems. However, you would need to replant these cover crops every year, which would of course get expensive over time for seed. In this project, our main goal was to measure the effects of the perennial ground cover system and the interseeded cover crops on nitrogen losses in corn production. But of course, we also kept track of yield. We measured soil erosion or soil moisture content, aggregate stability, and phosphorus losses. And then we compared the performance of our cover crops, or our cover crop treatments to a standard continuous corn production system. Our project was located at Iowa State's Northeast Research Farm in Nashua, Iowa. At this farm, we have 36 one-acre plots, but we used 12 of them for the study that I'm describing today. We were in randomized complete block design with our treatments in triplicate, or each of the treatments was repeated on 3 different plots. The plots at the research farm have a specialized subsurface drainage system. So we have separate tiles for each plot. We have tiles in the center and the border of each plot. The center tile, we intercept and we monitor that for total flow. and then a portion of the flow is retained for nutrient analysis. Those border plots, however, we just don't collect anything from there, and that's so that we don't get any mixing from the plots surrounding it. So now I'll get into the specifics of each of our 4 treatments that I'll cover. First, we have the control, which was continuous corn, so no soybean rotation. It received about 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre, and that was through fall injected swine manure. We strip tilled all the plots in this study, and the rows are in this treatment are in a pretty standard configuration where we have 30 inches of spacing between each corn row. Our perennial ground cover treatment was completely identical to the control in all of its management and fertilizing, but the difference here is that we used Kentucky bluegrass, which we initially planted in October of 2020 as our perennial ground cover. We're exploring Kentucky bluegrass because we have found that it's usually pretty easy to suppress and a lot of the time easy to establish, depending on if the weather cooperates. It's also really readily commercially available and less expensive than some of the other options we have. We have 2 interseeded cover crop treatments. The first treatment we have is in that standard row configuration with 30 inches of space between each corn row, so just like the perennial ground cover and the control. We planted the cover crop mix that I have on the screen here at about B4 corn development stage, and that was basically in early to mid-June of each year. And we planted that mix at about 30 kilograms per hectare total seed rate. And then our last treatment today is another interseeded cover crop treatment. This treatment gets the same cover crop mix, but the corn is in a twin row corn configuration. So in this system, sets of 2 rows of corn are planted just 8 inches apart. And then there's 52 inches of spacing before the next set of twin rows. So we have that really wide spacing where we plant the cover crops. And this allows more sunlight to get down to the cover crops so they establish better. In this treatment, though, we plant at the same seeding rate as in the standard row. So it also gets 30 kilograms per hectare of cover crop seed. All right, getting into some of our results. So we'll start with precipitation. We had really variable precipitation volumes and timing across the 3 years. So in 2021, that solid tan line on this graph, it was pretty dry in the spring and early summer. But then we had a wet fall in late summer that ended up with the year being pretty average. But overall, we had about 9 centimeters less rain than we normally get during the growing season. In 2022, that red dashed line, we had sort of the opposite happen where we had a drier fall and summer, but a wet spring. And that year we had about 11 centimeters less than average during the growing season. And then in 2023, it was looking pretty good at the very, very early season. But then it basically stopped raining and we got less than 50% of our total average growing season precipitation at the farm. So it is really dry. Of course, that difference in timing and total amount between the 3 years led to really different drainage patterns. So again, 2021 is that solid line there at the bottom, and we really didn't get much drainage flow until the fall, almost September. We ended up with about 3.7 centimeters average cumulative flow for our plots, which if you compare to previous studies at the farm, normally they are reporting about 15 to 20 centimeters, so still very low, but we did get some. In 2022, we had the opposite happen where we had a lot of flow in the spring and no flow in the fall. In 2023, that dashed green line at the bottom, we did not have really much flow at all, less than a centimeter total average for our plots. In some of our plots, we weren't able to get any water samples in the whole season. So obviously they varied from year to year, but we didn't see any differences between treatments overall. So like I said, the perennial ground cover was planted in 2020, and like I covered on the previous slide, the following spring of 2021 was really pretty dry. So we didn't need to suppress the bluegrass in 2021 because it was not really there. In 2022, the wet spring helped it establish a little better. We had some rows that had really strong grass establishment, but it's still pretty patchy. We suppressed the grass with a Liberty herbicide to turn it brown for a little while, and that was successful. However, after suppression, it got really dry and the grass didn't really bounce back maybe like we hoped it would. So we planted the grass again in 2023. And then it stopped raining again, so that really didn't help. So overall, we had some areas that were really strong, some areas that had nothing, patchy overall, just not really what we were hoping for Kentucky bluegrass establishment-wise. All right, to give you an idea of what our other cover crop treatments look like, here I have the pictures of the cover crops in the wide row interseeded cover crop treatment. You can see that we had a lot of growth there. It looks kind of like a jungle in there. But in the standard row configuration for our interseeded cover crops, we really did not get much growth. Basically, the cover crops were immediately shaded by the corn canopy. We had more than 100 times the amount of biomass in the wide rows than in the standard row widths at the end of the season. All right, here I am showing the corn yields in each year. You can see 2023 was significantly lower than the other 2 years, and that's not super surprising because we got less than 50% of our average precipitation. The wide row interseeded cover treatment was significantly lower in each year, with a larger effect in 2021 and 2023 when the spring and early summers were more dry. There are a couple of reasons why we think the wide row treatment was lower, including our nitrogen application was in 30-inch spacing, and also it was really dry, so the corn was probably competing with those cover crops for moisture. Our other 3 treatments, though, did not statistically differ from one another in any of the years. On this slide, I'm showing the flow-weighted average nitrate concentrations in the drainage water samples for each of the 3 years. And that dashed line I have there is kind of our goal, which is the 10 milligrams per liter EPA drinking water standard. So we want to be below that line. So you can see in 2021, nitrate concentrations in the drainage water were much below the EPA standard, but also it didn't really rain. So our nitrogen probably didn't move very much, and we didn't get a whole lot of flow like I showed on that flow graph. We saw the highest concentrations in 2022, the year with the highest spring drainage flows. So that's not super surprising. And also we probably had a buildup of nitrogen for being really dry the previous year. And then in 2023, we saw overall variability, but no statistically significant treatment differences, although you can see it was kind of really variable. We didn't get a whole lot of samples during the year just because we didn't have a lot of drainage flow. If you remember on the drainage side, we only got 0.25 centimeters of total cumulative flow on average. And some of our plots, we actually didn't get any water quality samples on 2 of them. So now I'll get into the treatments that had significant differences in the next couple of slides. So here I'm looking a little bit closer at the perennial ground cover treatment versus the control. We can see in 2021, when we had a pretty dry spring followed by a wet summer, the difference between the PGC and the control was 11%. In the following year, when we had a wetter spring and a dry summer, the difference was 25%. And in 2023, when we had more rain in the spring than in the summer, but it was still pretty dry overall, we saw an 18% difference. So it's not super unexpected that the perennial ground cover would have the most effect when the springs are more wet, since that's the only treatment that had plants growing in the field to take up nitrate because the corn wasn't growing or was really small at the time of the precipitation. But this result seems promising overall for the perennial ground cover system because wet springs are kind of more of the norm that we see in the Corn Belt and Iowa especially. Doing the same for the wide row interseeded cover treatment, we saw a 72% difference between this treatment and the control in 2021, a 12% difference in 2022, and a 27% difference in 2023. So we had the wet summer and fall in 2021. So it's not surprising that that year was where we saw the biggest difference because the cover crops were really growing strongly at that time. So let's look at the averages for our yield and nitrogen concentrations. For nitrogen concentrations, you can see that the perennial ground cover and the wide row interseeded cover were significantly lower than the control and the standard row interseeded cover treatment. For yield, there was no statistical difference between the 3 standard row width treatments, but the wide row interseeded treatment was significantly lower than the other 3 treatments, both in every year and overall. So if I was going to rate the performance of the PGC system, I would give it a thumbs up because it reduced nitrate concentration and it didn't reduce yield. So this is especially exciting when you consider that the Kentucky bluegrass really didn't look that great. But also the fact that it didn't look that great might mean we don't have the whole story for yield, but it could also imply that maybe we don't need the entire field to be covered in Kentucky bluegrass in order to make a difference on water quality. I would give the standard row interseeded cover treatment just a general thumbs down because they didn't establish that well. So we basically spent money to plant it, but it didn't really do anything. And then for the wide row interseeded cover treatment, it would get a thumbs up for nitrate concentration because it was the most effective, but it would get a thumbs down for yield. And that's a pretty big yield hit that I don't think most farmers would be wanting to take, even though it's pretty effective for water quality improvements. We also measured other things that I left out just because we didn't see treatment effects. So we kept track of total reactive phosphorus, but we didn't see any treatment differences. It was super variable between years, but nothing between treatments really. Same with both phosphorus and nitrogen loads. There wasn't any treatment effect. Soil moisture content basically showed it was just very dry most of the time. We put out some soil erosion pads, and we didn't see a whole lot of erosion in general because it didn't rain a whole lot. And it's very flat. We kept track of aggregate stability in a couple different methods, and we didn't see any treatment changes yet, but that might take longer to accumulate that soil carbon and actually make a difference there. And then we also buried strips of cotton, but found that the decomposition was mostly related to how much it rained during the period that it was buried. And so it was kind of hard to plan when you were going to dig them up. In the first year, we buried 3 and dug 1 up a month, and then they barely decomposed. And the second year, they decomposed a lot because it started raining a lot in the spring. And by the time we got to the last one, they were all gone. So it was a little bit hard to plan on that one. So to recap what we saw, for yield, we saw an average 20% reduction in the wide row interseeded cover, but the other treatments were all basically the same. For nitrogen concentrations, reduced the flow weighted average concentration by 24% when you compare the perennial ground cover treatment to the control, and 27% when you compare the wide row interseeded cover treatment to the control. We didn't see treatment effects for phosphorus, flow, either of the nutrient loads, aggregate stability, or soil moisture. In the future, we want to look at other PGC species like that summer dormant one I brought up at the very beginning to look at their compatibility with PGC on sort of this bigger scale plot. We also want to get the perennial ground covers integrated into corn and soybean rotations to figure out how it fits in with water quality and yield there, since that's more of what's kind of happening on the landscape. And finally, we want to find a better way to quantify the establishment of the perennial ground covers in general. I found it really hard to put down our grid count and decide what the average was on the plot because there was just a lot of in-plot variability and between-plot variability. So we want to try to use satellite or maybe drone imagery to make that process easier. And then having that better way of establishment or quantifying establishment will make it easier to contextualize the results of our studies in the future, because you can contextualize them based on how well the PGC was actually established. So in this next phase of the study that they're doing, they have that summer dormant radix hybrid bulbosa planted at the farm. So this was it last week. So it's looking really strong. It established very well because we had the wet spring that we've been having this year. And then it should go dormant within the next month or so. And then this is our Kentucky bluegrass. So this is the same that we had currently. It's still pretty patchy, but you can see that it really did love the moisture we've been getting. It's very tall and thick in the places where it is. All right.
All right. Thanks. Thanks, Gabby. I'm trying to get there we go, video on. All right. If you watch this webinar live and would like to need to earn a CCA CEU, please send your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number to Elena Whitaker by 5 o'clock today. Elena's email is alenaw@iastate.edu. Again, send your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number by 5 o'clock today. Let's go to the next slide.
Wait, was that too far?
Okay, yep, we're good. Yep,
Sorry.
Now it went back. There we go. There we go. All right.
Sorry.
If you watch this webinar live and are willing to fill out a voluntary demographic survey, we would greatly appreciate it. Only one response is needed for all 2024 webinars. You can go to the iowalearningfarms.org/survey to fill that out, or scan the QR code. If I'll keep it up for another second. All right, let's go to the next slide and we'll plug the webinar for next week. That Adam Schneiders and Justin Clark are going to talk about the DNR cover crop seed production project that they've been working on. All right, get your questions in if you have them, but we do have some here. All right, we'll start with, I guess, there was a question here about whether the cover crops, are there cover crops that could also be used as cash crops?
Yeah, I think so. We didn't have, I mean, technically in our interseeded treatments, maybe you could have cows graze.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yep.
So it's sort of like a cash crop there. But yeah, I think in the definition maybe of cover crops, you don't harvest them.
That is.
But you could.
Yeah, you're exactly right. There may be, I'll just jump in that there may be, yeah, some definition things there, especially relative to crop insurance, but there are some people looking at, just like you said, I mean, there could be some cash value from grazing. Some people are looking at harvesting rye, either as like silage or even to feed to an anaerobic digester. And there are even some people looking at camelina as that would be, have some similar properties, and they might be harvesting. Okay, there was a question here. Would the results be the same with anhydrous ammonia as with swine manure? I might jump in with that, Gabby, just because we've done a lot of work with that up at the Nashua site. And what we've found is that when we apply liquid swine manure at a similar rate and at a similar time as commercial fertilizer, we see similar nitrate losses from that system. Okay, can you say again what species were used for the perennial ground cover and for the wide and regular interseeded cover?
Yeah, so for the perennial ground cover, we used Kentucky bluegrass, and it was a mix for our interseeded cover crops, which I'll just click through. Sorry, this might be annoying.
That's okay.
Okay. Yeah, so we've got sun hemp, cowpeas, yellow blossom, sweet clover. So this was the mix. It varied a little bit from year to year just based on what was available, but that was basically it.
Okay, great. So there was a question whether, I guess, kind of two people ask a question somewhat related. Did you measure the biomass in the cover crop treatments? And then what percentage of perennial bluegrass cover do you think is necessary to see the water quality improvement?
Yeah, so we did measure it on the interseeded cover crops at the end of the season only. So we had around 15 to 20 average kilograms per hectare in the standard row interseeded cover treatment, and more like 1,400 kilograms per hectare in the wide row interseeded cover. So there's a really big difference between the two interseeded treatments. We didn't measure that for the perennial ground cover.
Okay.
It would be sort of odd to measure it since we're suppressing it. It's going to limit how much biomass it accumulates, I think. And then what was the other question?
What percentage of perennial bluegrass cover do you think is necessary to see a water quality improvement?
Yeah, I mean, this study, we had less than 10% coverage on average across our plots, and we saw a water quality improvement. It probably depends on how much of a water quality improvement you want to have. And then I also think from year to year, it's going to depend what the timing of your precipitation is. So I think the perennial ground cover will have a big difference if we have sort of more of like the typical year where we have a wet spring. Versus when it's dormant in the summer, if it's really wet at that time, it might not make as big of a difference.
So I have to say that I think all of us are sad in a way that Gabby's done, because now we get the rain when she is done with this project. And they got 8 inches of rain in May alone at this research site, and just got about 2.3, 2.4 inches last night. So I am, when you showed the picture of what the hybrid bulbosa looks like, or what the bulbosa looks like for this year, I am super curious to see how what things look like for the nitrate as we move forward at this site, because I think we will really be testing whether we see a difference this year.
Yeah, it will be really interesting.
Yep.
I mean, even the Kentucky bluegrass where it is, it looks pretty strong. So
strong. Okay. Yeah, might not be covering a great amount of the soil surface, but there's still good growth where it is this year.
Yeah, it's still there.
Yep. Okay, there was a question. Yeah, that's a good one. What method of planting was used to plant the cover crop and the perennial ground cover?
The first time with the perennial ground cover, it was like drilled in, and then like when we did it again in 2023 in the spring, it was just like overseeded, and that's the same with the interseeded cover crops.
Okay. The interseeded were, they had a seeder, I think.
Yeah, in the first year.
First year,
we did,
okay.
And then just like scheduling conflicts, we had to hand seed it.
Yep. Are there, okay. Oh, somebody had said, great job. Are there plans to continue or modify this project in the future? I think there has been some modification, right?
Yeah, so now we have the radix hybrid bulbosa. So that's the summer dormant grass that has shown some promise in some smaller scale plots, at least yield wise, with corn. And so we have that on 6 plots at Nashua now in corn and soybeans. The Kentucky bluegrass stayed where it is in the continuous corn plots, but then we're also comparing that to cereal rye, interseeded cereal rye, just to see. Yeah.
Okay. Were there any weed issues that were encountered?
I think the weather was sort of on our side on the weed. Like, I don't think the weeds were real bad. But the farm staff does, if they, at least in the Kentucky bluegrass, they did like selectively spray by hand if they ran into anything. But there was nothing like crazy of note that we saw.
Okay. I think maybe if you can go back maybe to the corn yield. Somebody asked if you experienced any corn yield drag. I think you showed that, but
Let me, there we go.
yeah, cool.
So for the perennial ground cover, it was the same, but for the wide row interseeded cover treatment, we did see yield loss quite a bit.
And Gabby, this might be more a question for Dr. Rahman and some others, but somebody asked if you're searching for alternative ground covers, what other ones might be being considered? And I know as part of the PGC project, there's quite a bit of work in that area.
Yeah. So the Kentucky bluegrass, people are looking at better ways to get it established and increase the reliability of establishment and suppression. The radix hybrid bulbosa is sort of like the big one right now, since you don't have to suppress it. And then there's some clover, white clover, or no, Cura clover that some people are looking at in separate studies. Yeah.
Okay, great. There are kind of a couple questions on, how you might generalize these results, kind of for what region they might be applicable. And I think, maybe it's putting into context because as part of the PGC project, I think there are some field sites in other areas as well, maybe not looking at drainage, but I guess maybe put it in maybe if there's anything that you can provide on context of what you've seen here compared to maybe some of the other work that's been done as part of the PGC project.
Yeah. I think that climate, even just on the first, I'll start with like suppression. So it was easy for us to get the grass suppressed, but that wasn't the case for everybody. And even just between Ames and Nashua, we had really different results just because of the weather that day. So that's something they're looking into. And yeah, there's trials in like Kentucky and Kansas, Nebraska. So there's big differences in establishment if you have access to irrigation, which we didn't, but people who have access to irrigation, it's obviously going to be a lot more reliable to get the grass established. But to generalize these results, I mean, it's also hard to even do that for the place or the study site, because the precipitation was just really sort of all over and not what we expected.
All right,
there is a wide range of studies being done, so hopefully we can get really, by the end of the region PGC project, generalizable results.
Yeah, I think as some of those come in, we'll have to get other researchers and grad students on to share some of those results of what they've seen in other areas. Because as you said, this is, for your work, kind of unfortunate it was so dry, although, we learned something during those dry years as well, which one is don't try to establish it if it's so dry, but, not much we could,
It was something that I don't think that we quite knew before, that we would run into issues with the Kentucky bluegrass.
Yeah, exactly. Did you all have discussions about why you think there was that yield reduction in that wide row system?
Yeah, so the manure applicator is just in 30-inch row spacing, so that probably has a lot to do with it, maybe. So basically like one row of the twin row of corn would be really close to the fertilizer, and then this next band of fertilizer would be more in the cover crops, and so the corn would have to sort of spread out to get that, which in dry years the roots don't normally spread out, they spread down, so that kind of probably added to it. We didn't see a soil moisture difference in what we were measuring in those first 6 inches, but maybe further down there was something going on, since the cover crops were so strong. They could have been competing with the corn there.
All right. Anybody? So in a this is kind of thinking about it from an extension standpoint. In a wellhead protection area, do you think this type of system, the perennial ground cover Kentucky bluegrass, might be a good long-term sustainable approach to help reduce the potential for nitrate leaching?
I'm not I don't really know what wellhead protection areas
Okay,
are, but
okay.
I think, yeah, probably.
Yeah, to protect, yeah, where we're pulling water from a
Yeah.
shallow aquifer there.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it
Well,
might be,
yeah, I
yep.
think from what we saw here, it can make a difference in nitrate. And I think with more well-established Kentucky bluegrass, it would probably make even bigger of a difference.
Okay, cool. All right, still have time if somebody has a question, but otherwise if we can jump to the slide. If you need a CCA CEU and you are on today, please email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today. Include your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. And then put in a plug for the webinar next week. We're going to have the folks from DNR, Adam Schneiders and Justin Clark, going to talk about the DNR cover crop seed production project. So with that, Dr. Myers, thank you so much for the work on this and for presenting today. And also, thank you for presenting on short notice, because I know we kind of got to you a little later than normal, but I'm glad we did before you were gone. So
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for
okay,
having me.